Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. What's going on over there in Westminster and the like. Oscar Reddrop is a former special advisor to Boris Johnson when Mr Johnson was Prime Minister. Oscar, good to have you back with us, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you doing, Ian?
Very good, thanks. Listen, it's rather interesting, isn't it? At the moment, we're watching this kind of compare and contrast play carry out between what the Americans are doing and what the Brits are doing. And as Donald Trump is really taking no prisoners, he's like, look, I said I'd do this, and now I'm doing it, whether it's deportations, they've happened. He had a fallout with Colombia for about 3 minutes before they realised it wasn't in their interest to fall out. Guantanamo Bay, back in business. Whereas over here, we've got a very different approach, it seems. Mr Starmer's talking about migrants who delay rescues until they reach British waters, facing 5 years in jail. He's also talking again about the people smugglers, and if we find them, they can also be charged with endangering life at sea, which seems like so far away from the real daily problem as to be almost laughable. But this is the difference in our two countries' approaches.
Yeah, I mean, here in the UK, and again, I'm not being party political, you know, it's very easy to kick the Labour government, but look, this has been a problem that attached itself to all, you know, different governments of all colours. We do triangulation here. We get worried about kind of scaring and we want to please all sections of society all the time, and we tiptoe around stuff. I think that is particularly prevalent with the way Keir Starmer does his business in government. And then you look across the Atlantic and you just see, you know, you see an administration and strong leadership that completely is double down focused on exactly the key priorities that the voters voted them in for. And we just struggle with that in this country. We struggle with the awkward conversations. We have a civil service that is often well-intentioned, I would actually say. They're not always this evil kind of sludge, or that they're often, sometimes, you know, us conservatives have kind of bashed them with at times. But it's just too flabby. It doesn't get things done. And then, you know, members of the public, and politicians forget this. Members of the public have jobs and they have quite busy jobs. And so they understand the concept of like having to do things quickly and understand priorities. And they watch their politicians kind of rock back and forth for years and, you know, kind of moving from left to right and doing nothing. And, you know, I think what's going on in America in terms of the way they absolutely, you know, dodge, they're going to absolutely rip up and slim down government, you know, offer people redundancy packages, just get people out of the way. If you're not interested in furthering the mandate that we have and the country's agenda, then get out of here. And I do think that is a real lesson we could learn from in the UK, particularly on stuff like immigration.
What was it like? I mean, you were, you know, in more meetings than you can, you know, remember with Boris Johnson when he was the Prime Minister. You'd have sat there with other advisors, you know, what's on the agenda today? What's our approach to this? You know, how do we tackle that? Did that come up a lot? You know, what other people might think? Was that kind of always an underpinning, almost barrier to anything? We can't upset that group or that group, so we better do this just to be sure.
I mean, you can feel like, you know, number 10 can feel like a submarine almost, and you completely lose concept of what's important and priorities. You have the media, different elements of the media going after you and your agenda. You have a lot of MPs in your own party who have their own issues and their own priorities, and then, you know, opposition and, you know, strong leadership and strong government. We tried not to listen to the opposition kind of carping from the sidelines, but you can lose a sense of what's important. And, you know, in fairness, I actually think when he was at his best, Boris was so good at getting out there and spending time with the public and out on the stump. And, you know, I haven't seen Keir Starmer around a crowd of people, you know, on the hoof, you know, ad hoc, kind of actually gelling with the public. I haven't seen that once since he's been in power. So that's when Boris was at his best. Well, look, in terms of the issue of immigration specifically, I think we genuinely got really infused by Rwanda, as in we knew that was going to be difficult. It was going to be unpalatable to a lot of people, and actually, just pragmatically, it was going to be difficult to implement, as I think we found out. But we felt like it was a brave piece of legislation, a brave bit of action that we needed to solve the problem of illegal immigration into this country. So there was quite a lot of enthusiasm around that time for that. We hear the "smash the gangs" catchphrase a lot from this government, and it's just going to take more than that. And I know the Conservatives are all very, they're having their internal debate probably on the ECHR and their position on that. And in terms of reforming, and I'd be interested to know what your callers think of this, particularly when we look at ICE and we look at what Trump's doing over in America. And I'm not necessarily attaching any of my personal politics to this, but I think deportation is going to become an issue, and in our kind of political language, a lot more in the UK. And I'd be really interested to see how Reform and the Conservative parties, as we build to the next election, and the problem of illegal immigration inevitably doesn't get any better. It'd be interesting to see how that kind of American theme enters our politics.
Yeah, absolutely, because there is, the Venn diagram naturally throws up that correlation. So we'll watch over the next few years as to how that plays out. Heathrow, of course, was in the news yesterday after Rachel Reeves. I mean, I've heard of U-turns and reverse ferrets, but, this is the party that was so wedded to net zero and suddenly have gone, yeah, we don't believe in the end of the planet anymore because, against our very own words, we're going to build a runway. Now, I'm quite supportive of a runway, but they weren't. Ed Miliband certainly wasn't. They'd all voted against it. Ed had previously threatened to resign under Gordon Brown, of course, over this very issue. And here they are turning it all around. But fear not, because according to Ryanair's Michael O'Leary, it won't happen until 2050 anyway. God knows why it takes so long to do things in this country. Your previous boss, sorry to bring Boris Johnson up again, but, he was the guy you worked for. He didn't go a bundle on the third runway either, did he?
No, I mean, look, it's a hugely politically contentious issue. I'm not quite sure why the Labour Party want to get into an internal fight on it, which is, we will inevitably see with Ed Miliband, what we've inevitably already seen with Sadiq Khan. Look, yesterday, going for growth, all the rest of it, I kind of, and don't get me wrong, a lot of conservative think tanks and conservative thinkers, were pretty positive about it because it is, very big, capital letters growth stuff, supply side reforms, etc., etc. Like yourself, I think a third runway, yeah, why not? Let's go for it. But the problem for me is that you just don't get a sense that any of this is going to happen in months, in years, and the way things are, unfortunately, in this country, and it's very depressing to admit, potentially decades. So if I'm sat there watching a chancellor who, weeks ago was saying it was all doom and gloom, this is the most, the worst economic situation we've had since the war, basically created a self-fulfilling prophecy that allowed the city and the markets to turn around and say, we have no confidence in you. Yes. And then all of a sudden there's a kind of, slightly grimaced smile saying everything's rosy, everything's brilliant. If I'm watching that and I'm a voter and my food prices, when I do my shop, my food bills are going up, my utility bills are going up, my wage is stagnated, I'm a small business, and the national insurance NICS rise on businesses has gone up, so I can't employ as many people. I'm watching yesterday and I'm going, you're living in some alternate kind of make-believe fairy tale land. Yeah. I mean, what is going to be delivered, now for the great British public?
Well, indeed, and up until relatively recently, it would have been, sort of in cracking news for the Conservatives, and Kemi Badenoch would have been, rubbing her hands on a daily basis. It would have been open goal. She'd have been out there eating in all those lovely Westminster restaurants on a nightly basis, raising a glass to her inevitable success in a few years' time. But of course, then these pesky characters called Reform UK came along and kind of stole the clothes.
Well, I tell you what, if I was Reform at this moment in time, I would watch a really out-of-touch Labour government talk about, you know what, Ian, I can't even remember what it was called, like the Oxbridge growth corridor, in south of England. Right. I'd watch all that stuff and I'd go, we've got a real opportunity here to make the economy work for, in fairness, actually, it made me think of levelling up yesterday. I know it didn't quite come off. I know people scoffed at it. But what did that mean? That was kind of bus routes in Middlesbrough. That was
I liked it. I thought it was a great phrase, levelling up.
yeah.
I didn't see what was wrong with that.
And it was revamped, train stations in Darlington. Yesterday, I got none of that. And if I was Reform, I'd be looking, this is a real opportunity for us. Yeah. Yes, growth is the aim of the Labour government, but they don't know how to get there. They don't know how to make it feel real and attainable for regular people. There's a real opportunity for Reform. You're right, Ian.
Yeah. Also, this one, the assisted dying bill, of course, which is incredibly contentious for obvious reasons. It does divide the room. I'm not sure whether you ever really drag one side across to yours on this one. It's kind of like those abortion, those kind of debates. You sort of tend to either believe that or you don't. And I know there's some grey area on this, but there's certainly controversy either way. Assisted dying campaigners are considering replacing the High Court judge element of the proposals with a panel of experts to decide on assisted death. That's going to do, I would have thought, very little to support their side of the argument here.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's an incredibly contentious issue, and I think that for a lot of people, it will sit really awkwardly. Anything that means that makes the decision for someone in their assisted dying easier, I think it's going to make people feel really nervous. And around the time we had this vote, a lot of the people who, in inverted commas, lost the vote, who were very, very anti this piece of legislation, they wanted it to be, at least in the next few stages, wanted it to be really thought out and us to really, really take our time on this. I think a lot of really reasonable people, whatever they think about this policy, and in fairness, we do have a court's backlog. I mean, we've heard the Labour Party talk about that, the Labour government, talk about that, and they are right. That is just a reality. But we really need to think carefully about this legislation. And as people who were very much in favour of the bill, a lot of the assurances they gave during that process to those on the other side were like, we're going to take our time on this. Yeah. And I think that dropping that High Court judge's approval, I think that will make people quite a little bit nervous on such a huge emotive issue.
Absolutely. Although the courts, of course, argue that it would overwhelm them. It would overwhelm the system if you are looking at the amount of time involved in a judge. So it remains contentious. We will see how far it goes. I just want to bring this story in, if I can, Oscar, as well. This has just come out. Russian arrest warrant for UK journalist. This is Jerome Starkey of this parish, of where I sit. He's the Sun's defence editor, a very well-respected journalist, appears on the programme from time to time as well, but a Russian court has accused him of illegally crossing the border into Russia to report on Ukraine's defence. Now, we can laugh this stuff off, but I wouldn't want to have an arrest warrant from Russia against me, because, you don't know what's going to happen each time you walk into a cafe, for goodness sake. And we can say this is just blood. Downing Street have condemned this, by the way. They've called it desperate rhetoric from Putin's administration, but disturbing nonetheless when reporters can't simply do their job.
Yeah, and it's real kind of Russia playbook at this moment in time, scare tactics. And if anything, and you're right not to laugh it off or to, kind of shrug your shoulders at it. It's great that Downing Street have condemned it. And, from Jerome's perspective, it should almost be worn as a badge of honour that he's holding power to account. He's doing the job of a journalist during incredibly difficult times. So, yeah, I mean, it's really good you're raising that. And I think that should be a badge of honour for someone like Jerome. That's someone doing his job right. Absolutely spot on. Oscar, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Oscar Reddrop, he's a former special advisor to Boris Johnson.